Hello, my name is Eva. I thought I was planning the happiest day of my life, saving every dollar, signing every contract, building everything from scratch. But at my own rehearsal dinner, my sister walked in, wearing my gown, holding my fiancé's hand, and my mother clapped for her. They drained my savings, erased my name from the guest list, even signed the marriage papers behind my back. If your own family could steal everything you built, what would you do? My name is Ava, and by the time spring settled over San Antonio in 2025, I thought my life was finally aligning into the shape I had worked toward for years. The air carried that soft warmth, the kind that pressed down during the day but slipped into coolness when the sun dipped. Spanish colonial arches downtown glowed in golden light. The Riverwalk was crowded with tourists, mariachi songs weaving through the chatter. From the outside, everything looked like celebration. On the inside, I was preparing for the biggest celebration of my life, yet it felt strangely like I was the only one building it. I was in my mid-30s, the youngest daughter in my family, and my wedding was only weeks away. Everyone should have been circling around me, helping with flowers, outfits, guest lists. But the truth was simpler and colder. I had been carrying this weight mostly by myself. As the old saying goes, sometimes silence speaks louder than applause. My silence, my late nights, my checkbook, my careful planning was proof. Yet I could already sense the imbalance. I had sensed it for years, the way some cracks run deep under a home before the foundation even shows a fracture. My family's imbalance was one of those cracks. I kept remembering a line by Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. My family had shown me long ago that I was not their shining star. Still, I pressed forward. I told myself this wedding would change the way they saw me, even if deep down, I wasn't sure it would. Booking the venue had been the first mountain I climbed alone. Murphy's Hall wasn't extravagant by Hollywood standards, but in San Antonio, it was considered one of the loveliest places for a spring wedding. Tall windows, oak floors, chandeliers that gave off a warm glow instead of a harsh glare. I spent nights poring over my budget, skipping dinners out, saying no to things I wanted, because I was determined to walk into that hall in a gown of my own choosing. I negotiated with vendors the way someone bargains for a used car. The florist looked at me with sympathy when I asked if we could reduce the rose order, swapping half for cheaper hydrangeas. The baker insisted on full payment up front, so I spread my savings thin and promised myself I'd manage. I remember sitting at my desk late at night, papers spread everywhere, bank statements, invoices, reminders scrawled on sticky notes. My eyes would blur, and I'd take a breath, whispering, "One more month, just one more month." Sedona, my sister, rarely appeared in these processes. She came when there was a camera, when she could walk into a boutique and smile at attendants, when she could float through a room and let everyone admire her. Vendors remembered her name, not mine. Once, at the venue office, the manager glanced at Sedona, smiled, and said, "So, you're the bride?" I corrected him softly. "No, that's me. Eva." He flushed, apologized, but Sedona only gave me that familiar smirk, the one that said she didn't mind the mistake one bit. On the drive home that night, I thought to myself, why does everyone assume I'm the background, never the center? The question echoed inside me, as steady as the beat of my pulse. A week later, we gathered at my mother's house for a family dinner. Mahola, my mother, believed in hosting the way Texans believe in barbecue. Plentiful, smoky, served with laughter that often disguised sharp edges. The smell of brisket filled the house, the tang of barbecue sauce clinging to the air. Cousins crowded around the table, uncles poured sweet tea, and my mother floated between the kitchen and dining room, keeping plates full and conversations flowing. I sat at the end of the table, folding napkins, watching Sedona glide through the room in a new dress that shimmered under the chandelier. People asked about her new job in Austin, her travel, her friends. No one asked about the hall I had booked, the deposits I had scraped together, the countless hours of planning I had poured into this wedding. At one point, my mother raised her glass and smiled toward Sedona. "Isn't she beautiful? Always looked like she was born for the spotlight." Relatives nodded. Some clapped lightly against the table. My fork hovered above my plate, frozen. I said nothing. I only observed, taking mental notes the way a lawyer records testimony. I excused myself to the kitchen, rinsed plates no one had asked me to handle, and whispered under my breath, "It is what it is." But inside, my chest tightened. It wasn't just what it was what it had always been. Then the moment came that carved itself into my bones. We were midway through dessert, cobbler served with vanilla ice cream, when two family friends arrived late. My mother rushed to greet them, pulling them into the dining room. Smiling proudly, she gestured to me and said, "This is my youngest, Eva, the bridesmaid." The words sliced through me sharper than any knife. I heard laughter from one cousin, a muffled cough from another, the kind of silence that fills a room when people know something wrong has been said, but no one dares to correct it. I looked at my mother, stunned. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice firm even as my hands trembled under the table. "I'm the bride." She blinked, as if the correction was trivial, and then waved her hand. "Well, Sedona always looked more like one." My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. Humiliation burned hot, yet I sat tall, my face steady. My sister smiled politely, pretending not to notice, though her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who had once again been crowned without asking. In that instant, all the years of being second place rushed back. The school plays where she got the lead and I got the chorus, the birthdays where her gifts sparkled and mine were practical, the countless moments when I faded so she could shine. I realized this wasn't new. It was the same story, played out again in front of an audience. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply swallowed the sting and let dignity sit beside me like a shield. Later that night, I drove home in silence, the hum of the highway filling the empty space where words should have been. My mother's dismissal echoed, "Bridesmaid, not bride." In her eyes, Sedona had always been the rightful star, and I had been the understudy. But as I parked and sat in the dark of my car, I whispered to myself, "Respect isn't given. Sometimes you have to take it back." I knew then that this wouldn't be the last time my family tried to erase me, but I also knew, for the first time in years, that I wasn't going to let them succeed. That night, as I set my keys on the counter and slipped off my shoes, another memory surfaced. Uninvited, sharp, undeniable. A promise once whispered under a Texas sky. A promise that was about to break wide open. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, the word bridesmaid still echoed in my ears. Yet another memory rose uninvited, carrying with it a sting I couldn't shake. Years earlier, under the soft heat of a Texas night, Orion had pulled me close in my mother's backyard. The cicadas sang so loudly it felt like the whole earth was buzzing with their song. The grass was damp beneath our bare feet, and the scent of mesquite smoke drifted in from a neighbor's grill. I remember his hands steady on mine as he whispered words that at the time felt sacred. "You'll never be second place with me," he had said. His voice was steady, the kind of voice you lean into when you're tired of being overlooked. I believed him. I wanted to believe that someone could finally see me, not as Sedona's sister, not as Mahola's practical daughter, but as myself. Now, sitting years later with that memory, the irony was suffocating. Jonathan Swift once wrote, "Promises are like pie crusts, made to be broken." I thought of that line, bitterly amused. Orion's promise hadn't aged well. It had cracked under the simplest pressure, and I was left staring at the pieces. There had been a time when Orion defended me, when he shielded me from my family's constant comparisons. I remember once at a Sunday dinner, my mother told me to let Sedona handle the centerpiece decorations because she had an eye for beauty. Orion had spoken up then, saying, "Eva's the one with vision. You just never pay attention." For a fleeting moment, I felt seen. But now, he was different. Conversations with him grew shorter. His phone buzzed constantly, and he'd say he was too busy to meet. He canceled plans more often than he kept them. One evening, I sat at a small cafe downtown, the kind with brick walls and twinkle lights strung above the patio. I had chosen the table near the fountain, waiting for him. My coffee grew cold. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, my phone buzzed with his text. Can't make it. Something came up. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes, noticed my untouched plate and the way I kept glancing at the door. She refilled my cup and said gently, "Men who cancel too often usually have someone else." Her words stung because they matched the thought I had been avoiding. Unease crawled up my spine. I thought of the warnings people throw around. Red flags. They were there, waving brightly, and I kept trying to look past them, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The signs grew louder in the quiet moments. Orion stopped looking me in the eye when he spoke. He guarded his phone as if it were a fragile secret, turning it screen side down on the table, carrying it even to the bathroom. He laughed at messages he wouldn't share, then grew tense when I asked. Late one night, as I walked down the hallway at my mother's house, I heard Sedona's voice murmuring from the den. Curious, I peeked in. She was on the phone with Orion, her tone soft, playful, the kind of tone reserved for intimacy. I stepped inside. "Who are you talking to?" She looked startled for only a second before smiling casually. "Orion. He needed my help with some errands. You know how men are with planning. He wanted a second opinion." I nodded slowly, but something inside me tightened. She was too comfortable, too at ease, explaining it away. The next day, my mother praised Sedona at breakfast. "She sacrifices so much to help you, Ava. You're lucky to have her." Lucky. That word cut me sharper than the coffee's bitterness. They didn't see her inserting herself where she didn't belong. They didn't see Orion pulling away from me inch by inch. I whispered to myself, "It's not paranoia if the signs are right in front of you." An old American saying echoed in my head, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." I realized I was dangerously close to the second half of that line. Suspicion wasn't paranoia anymore. It was reality knocking on my door. A few days later, I went to the bridal boutique for my final gown fitting. The shop smelled of fresh fabric and lavender sachets. I had saved for months for that gown. Ivory silk with lace overlay, custom fitted after endless visits. I walked in with a quiet kind of joy, ready to see the dream I had paid for with my own sacrifices. And then I froze. Sedona stood in front of the mirror, twirling in my gown. The long train brushed the carpet as she laughed lightly, adjusting the bodice with practiced hands. A pair of family friends clapped, saying, "It looks like it was made for her." My reflection appeared in the mirror behind her, me standing stiff, hands clenched at my sides. "That's my gown," I said firmly, my voice calm but edged with steel. Sedona turned, smiling as though she were doing me a favor. "Doesn't it look like it was made for me?" she asked sweetly. The friends nodded, their eyes sliding past me, their applause meant for her. I forced myself not to break, not to let my humiliation show. Inside, my thoughts were sharp. It wasn't just a dress. It was proof of what I built, proof of my savings, my choices, my vision. And now she wore it as if she had earned it, as if it had been meant for her all along. I left quietly, holding my bag close. My steps were steady, though my chest burned with fire. On the drive home, I thought of how betrayal doesn't always come in loud gestures. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, slipping into your life in the shape of a dress. It laughs softly, twirls in silk, and smiles as though it's doing nothing wrong. As I pulled into my driveway, one thought rang clear. Sometimes betrayal isn't loud, it sneaks in wearing your dress. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't whispers in the dark or gut feelings. It was tangible, visible, undeniable. And I knew deep down, this was only the beginning. After walking out of that boutique and watching Sedona twirl in my gown, I thought I had reached the limit of betrayal. But life has a cruel way of proving there's always more. Fabric was one thing, paper was another. Fabric could be stolen, worn, paraded, but ink carried permanence. A dress could be taken off. A signature could not. The morning sun rose pale over San Antonio a few days before the wedding. I told myself I would handle the paperwork for our marriage license personally. It felt like the sort of mundane task I could control, one corner of this storm that I could secure with my own two hands. The city was already awake when I pulled into the parking lot at City Hall, clerks shuffling in with coffee cups, a few people smoking under the awning. I took a breath and reminded myself, it's the ordinary mornings that sometimes break you the most. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. The lobby smelled faintly of ink and old paper, and the tap of keyboards echoed from the clerks behind glass counters. It was quiet, routine. My heels clicked on the tile as I walked to the counter with my documents clutched neatly in a folder. My father's voice, steady and practical, came back to me. Measure twice, cut once. I repeated it like a mantra as I took a ticket from the number dispenser. It was a small thing, but I believed I was taking control again. The waiting room was filled with people managing errands, renewing car tags, paying fines, filing for permits. A couple whispered about their lunch plans. An older man read the newspaper with thick glasses. A mother tried to hush her restless toddler. I told myself I was just like them, one more person getting business done. My quiet confidence held, for a moment. Then I heard it. A laugh, too familiar to ignore. It echoed from a corridor leading to the offices. I froze, every muscle tense, because I knew that laugh belonged to Sedona. I followed the sound, documents pressed against my chest. As I turned the corner, the world tilted. Sedona stood at a clerk's desk, pen in hand. Orion was beside her, his tie loosened, eyes fixed on the paper as the clerk slid it across the counter. Their names, hers and his, flowed onto the page in black ink. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Kale," the clerk said cheerfully. The words struck like a blow to the chest. My breath caught, and the folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the tile. "No," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "That's supposed to be me." Orion stiffened, but he didn't look at me. Sedona turned, her lips curving into a smile that wasn't joy. It was triumph. My fingers trembled. I wanted to move, to shout, to demand an explanation, but I felt my body go numb. The sound of the pen scratching across paper became unbearable, like the sound of a lock clicking shut on a prison door. Talk is cheap. Ink is permanent. That old American phrase played in my head like a cruel refrain. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't whispers or rumors. It was legal. It was binding. It was betrayal stamped with ink and sanctioned by the city itself. Sedona picked up the freshly signed papers, her nails tapping against the counter as if to emphasize her victory. She finally turned to me, her smirk widening. "Guess the dress fits. The papers, too," she said, voice dripping with mockery. Orion mumbled something. "Eva, I can explain." But his eyes darted everywhere except to mine. Cowardice hung on him like cologne. The clerk, realizing the situation, looked at me with pity. She leaned slightly over the counter and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Her sympathy was worse than cruelty. It made me feel small, exposed. Around us, a few people stopped, whispering as they realized what had happened. Their eyes cut into me, dissecting me, making me a spectacle. The humiliation was deeper than anything at my mother's dinner table. This wasn't a careless word or a stolen dress. This was irreversible. Ink didn't apologize. Ink didn't forget. I straightened, forcing my body to hold steady, though inside I burned. Dignity isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to let them take. I repeated those words silently, anchoring myself with them. Sedona slipped her arm through Orion's as if he were a trophy she had won. They walked past me, her perfume sharp, his silence louder than any excuse. People stepped aside for them, watching me instead of them, as though I were the one who had intruded. I bent down, gathered my scattered documents with slow, deliberate movements. Each paper felt heavier than it should, like bricks pressing into my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't call after them. I simply stood, walked to the exit, and let the glass doors close behind me. Outside, the sun was too bright. I stood on the steps of City Hall, folder pressed against me, and felt the weight of everything crash down. "They took my name from the paper," I whispered to myself, "but they haven't taken my fight." I left the documents behind on a bench outside, no longer caring for them. What had been written inside was already etched in my memory. I knew then this wasn't the end of betrayal. It was only another beginning. After what I witnessed at City Hall, I thought I had learned to brace myself. Betrayal was now inked on paper, and yet I still had to walk into Murphy's banquet hall that evening for the rehearsal dinner. The hall was the venue I had booked, the place I had signed contracts for, and I had imagined my name echoing proudly when the night was about me. Instead, I arrived with anxiety pressing against my ribs, knowing this family never missed a chance to remind me where I stood. The hall was draped in ivory and gold, chandeliers glowing soft yellow over the polished oak floors. Waiters moved quietly between tables, setting glasses, arranging plates. From a distance, it looked perfect, exactly as I had once pictured. But perfection mocked me. I walked in steady, cautious, determined not to show the storm inside. Sometimes you put walls up not to keep people out, I murmured to myself, but to see who cares enough to break them down. And as I scanned the crowd, I already knew Sedona was the one in the spotlight. The music softened, and then the doors opened. Sedona entered with Orion's arm hooked through hers. She wore a pale gown meant for me, its shimmer catching the light. She walked like she owned the air around her. My mother, Mahola, stood immediately and clapped loudly, her voice carrying across the hall. Finally, a real bride in this family. The sound that followed burned into me. Applause. Applause that should have been mine. Relatives rose to their feet. Some laughed with joy, others whispered excitedly. Their hands struck together, not for me, but for the woman who had taken everything I had built. I stayed seated, my spine straight, my face composed even as fire rose in my chest. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. A cousin leaned across the table, smiling at Sedona. You shine like you were born for this. Then Mahola looked at me with that sharp dismissiveness only a mother can wield against her child. Eva, take some pictures, won't you? As if my only role was to record Sedona's triumph. Inside, I thought, applause doesn't always mean approval. It can mean blindness. What they clapped for wasn't truth. It was a lie, dressed in satin, paraded through my hall. While others clinked glasses and cheered, a familiar face approached me. Marlene, a colleague from my office, slipped into the chair beside me. Her brow furrowed as she looked around, then back at me. Ava, she said quietly, I thought this was your wedding rehearsal. I managed a strained smile, the kind you give when words might shatter your dignity. It was supposed to be. Her eyes widened, glancing towards Sedona and Orion. This doesn't make sense. Everyone at work knew you were planning this wedding. I know, I answered softly, steady though my insides churned. But sense has never been this family's specialty. Marlene pressed her lips together, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Eva. This isn't right. Her discomfort made the injustice sharper. It wasn't just me seeing it anymore. Outsiders recognized the theft. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a family quirk. It was betrayal visible to anyone willing to look. I told myself, it's one thing to be erased in your own home. It's another to be erased in public. Shame pressed down hard, but alongside it, something else stirred. Quiet fury, cold resolve. I refused to cry. I refused to flee. Instead, I observed. My father used to tell me, strength isn't loud, it's steady. And so I steadied myself. I scanned the room, noting every detail. Who clapped the loudest, who smirked with satisfaction, who avoided my eyes. Each person, each gesture, I stored away like evidence in a case I was silently building. I told myself this moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of strategy. Silence, right now, would be more powerful than any outburst. So I adjusted my phone, pretending to check messages, while my ears caught every word, every laugh, every slight. If applause can crown her, I whispered inside my own head, silence can bury her. I stepped aside, my face calm, my steps deliberate, while the clapping still rang for the wrong bride. And deep inside, I knew the next insult would cut deeper. Not just words, not just applause, but something that reached into the very foundation I had built with my own hands. The applause from the rehearsal dinner still echoed in my ears like an unwanted drumbeat. It wasn't meant for me. It had crowned Sedona, and I had been left in the shadows once again. I sat there at the banquet hall table, fingers pressed against the edge of my glass, watching the way people leaned into her, laughing, clapping, telling her how radiant she looked. Every cheer that rose up felt like bricks piled on my chest. I tried to remind myself. Applause fades. Paper trails don't. I breathed deeply and scanned the room, not at the shimmering lights or the golden tablecloths, but at the smaller details most would overlook, the way place cards were set, the lists scattered on a side table, the guest ledger meant to record the names of those attending. My instinct whispered that betrayal was no longer a matter of stolen moments or casual insults. It had become institutional, structured, written down, the way corruption always is. I stood quietly, moving toward the registration table by the entrance, pretending to admire the decorations. What I saw next hollowed me out. On the guest list, my name sat at the very bottom, not as bride, not even as family. It was printed under staff/support. The ink glared back at me. Names represent existence, and mine had been buried beneath the people meant to serve at my wedding. A relative passing by chuckled lightly. "Oh, I didn't know you were helping with the event, Eva." I swallowed hard, turned to face him, and answered evenly, though my voice carried a sharp edge. "I thought I was supposed to be the bride." He blinked, awkward, muttered something about a mix-up, and hurried away. But I knew better. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, systematic. They were erasing me not only in spirit, but in print. "If your name's not on the list, you don't exist," I thought bitterly. An old American saying returning to me. The humiliation was sharper than applause because it was written into the very structure of the event. It meant my role wasn't forgotten. It was removed. I returned to my table with a frozen smile, my insides unraveling. My pen hovered over the napkin, scribbling notes I didn't intend to keep. I wasn't scribbling words. I was tracing my resolve. Later in the evening, as toasts were raised and laughter filled the hall, I slipped my phone out under the table. The glow lit my lap as I opened the banking app tied to the joint savings account Orion and I had created for the wedding. I wanted reassurance, some proof that my sacrifices were still intact. The numbers blinked on the screen. My heart sank. The balance was 0. I refreshed, hoping it was a glitch. The same. Then I clicked the transaction history. My stomach turned as I read the record. The funds, 18 months of savings, nights of skipped dinners, weekends of working extra hours, were drained. Transferred neatly into Orion's private account. "No," I whispered to myself. My hand tightened around the phone. "That's my money." I scrolled again, as if the history would change. It didn't. 18 months of saving, gone in seconds. The chatter around me blurred. I couldn't hear the music, the laughter, or the clinking glasses anymore. All I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears and the realization sinking deeper. Betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial theft. They hadn't only taken my dignity, they had stolen the very foundation of my future. Follow the money, and you'll find the truth. That old advice rang clear in my head. This wasn't an accident. It was planned. Sedona in my gown, applause ringing for her, my name shoved under staff, and now my money gone. It was all connected, each thread woven into a tapestry of betrayal. Despair pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. Then anger cut through, sharp and clean. My hands steadied as I put the phone away. Silent clarity replaced the panic. I knew what this meant. This wasn't about love. It was about erasing me entirely. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. Instead, I processed, my mind cutting through fog with icy precision. If they had erased my name from the guest list and drained my savings, this hadn't been a series of accidents. It had been orchestrated long before tonight. Sedona and Orion hadn't stumbled into betrayal. They had planned it, cultivated it, and carried it out with my own family's applause backing them. I thought I had lost love, but I was losing something deeper, my foundation. The hall, the dress, the savings, the applause. It all showed me that my family never intended me to stand as the bride. They had set the stage for Sedona all along, but as the realization sharpened, so did my resolve. Betrayal on this scale didn't deserve quiet tears. It demanded exposure. I folded my napkin neatly, set it on the table, and rose. Stepping outside the banquet hall, I inhaled the night air. The building glowed behind me, lit up with chandeliers and laughter that sounded like mockery. For a moment I stood still, staring at the light pouring from windows I had once dreamed of walking through with pride. Inside, I was erased. Outside, I was reborn in resolve. The betrayal wasn't over, I whispered to myself, steady and certain. The next would come from the person I once trusted most. I stepped out of the banquet hall after discovering that my savings had been stolen, the night air heavy against my skin. San Antonio's skyline glimmered under the stars, neon signs from nearby bars reflecting faintly against the polished windows of Murphy's Hall. Laughter spilled from inside, muffled by the glass doors, a sound that made me feel more like an intruder than a daughter. I leaned against the cool stone wall, staring at the ground, trying to steady my breathing. Betrayal was no longer random. It wasn't Sedona's charm or Orion's weakness in isolation. It was orchestrated. When too many hands move against you, it's not chaos. It's a plan. That thought drilled through me, cold and sharp. The applause, the guest list humiliation, the money drained from my account. These weren't scattered slights. They were pieces of a design, a family conspiracy taking shape in front of me, and I wasn't done seeing how deep it went. I returned to the hall, my steps slower, deliberate. I slid between clusters of guests, unnoticed like a shadow. As I neared the bar, I caught fragments of conversation, words not meant for my ears, but loud enough to slice through me. An aunt laughed softly, swirling champagne in her glass. Sedona deserves this more. Eva's too practical, not bride material. A man's voice, one of my uncles, replied without hesitation. The family image matters more than her feelings. Sedona makes us look good. That's what counts. The casual cruelty, the ease with which they dismissed me, stung more than if they had shouted in my face. Their glasses clinked together, laughter rising like a toast to my erasure. I froze for a moment, every muscle taut, but I didn't move toward them. I didn't break into their circle or demand an explanation. Instead, I absorbed every word, my mind cataloging voices and phrases like evidence in a trial. With family like this, I thought bitterly, who needs enemies? I drifted back toward the tables, passing people who avoided my eyes, some who smiled politely without warmth, others who smirked as though in on a private joke. They weren't witnesses to betrayal, they were participants, and I was the punchline. Then I saw her. My mother stood near the head table, posture elegant, her smile practiced. She held an envelope in her hands. Sedona and Orion stood before her, their heads tilted slightly, waiting like children before a benefactor. I slowed my steps, watching intently. She handed it to them with a proud tilt of her chin. "This makes it official," Mahola said, her voice warm but cutting. "Now everyone can see Sedona as the rightful bride." The words hit harder than any insult I'd ever heard. My breath caught. My own mother, her hands, once the same hands that braided my hair, that held mine when I was afraid of the dark, were now sealing my replacement. I stepped closer, my voice cold, steady, though my insides churned. "Your hands gave them what was mine." The room stilled for me, though perhaps only in my mind. Sedona's smirk widened, Orion shifted uncomfortably, and my mother simply turned her gaze on me with the dismissive calm of someone who believed she was right. Disbelief clashed with devastation, then hardened into cold clarity. Betrayal from a lover cuts deep. Betrayal from a sister can wound. But betrayal from a mother, betrayal that confirms you were never chosen, never enough, cuts to the bone. I remembered a quote I had once read from Abraham Lincoln. "To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men." My silence was no longer noble, it was becoming complicity. The envelope in Sedona's manicured hands, my mother's approving smile, the complicit stares of relatives, it all formed a picture clearer than any photograph. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased by the very woman who had brought me into this world. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I let the cold clarity anchor me, If my mother was willing to sign me away, then I had no reason to cling to the illusion of family loyalty. In my head, I whispered, if my own mother signs me away, then I'll write my own signature of justice. I turned from the scene, choosing not to confront her further in that moment. The fight wasn't here, not in this hall where applause covered betrayal and toasts masked cruelty. The fight would be in a place of my choosing, with weapons they didn't expect, evidence, strategy, silence sharpened into a blade. The bitterness inside me hardened into resolve. I wasn't simply a wronged bride anymore. I was a woman pushed past her limits, forged by humiliation into something unbreakable. I lingered near the doors, watching as my mother leaned into Sedona, whispering praise, her eyes sparkling with pride. In that moment, I realized I was no longer a daughter in her eyes. I was an outsider, an obstacle she was relieved to push aside. But I would not remain erased. If applause had crowned Sedona tonight, then knives, sharper, quieter, cutting deeper, were yet to come. The night didn't end after my mother handed Sedona that envelope. If anything, it sharpened. By the time the lights dimmed inside Murphy's banquet hall, I had already stopped thinking of my family as mine. They were enemies dressed as relatives, smiling through teeth that had bitten me for years. As the music softened and guests took their seats, a low hum filled the room, the sound of the projector warming up. My stomach tightened. I sat rigid in my chair, hands folded in my lap, while around me conversations buzzed. Sedona leaned against Orion, their laughter spilling in rehearsed harmony. My mother looked satisfied, as though the night was unfolding exactly as she had imagined. I told myself, the next knife wasn't steel. It was memory turned into spectacle. The projector clicked on, and a white glow filled the screen at the end of the hall. I braced myself, unsure of what blade they would wield next. I had expected to see my engagement photos with Orion, the ones I had paid for, the ones where I had chosen every pose, every backdrop, every outfit. Instead, the first image was Sedona. She stood beside Orion in my wedding venue, wearing pale silk that echoed the gown I had chosen. Her smile stretched wide as though the camera had captured victory. Orion's hand rested on her waist, his expression oddly stiff, but no one seemed to notice. A guest near me gasped with delight. "Oh, look at them, such a perfect couple!" My throat tightened. I whispered under my breath, low enough that only I could hear. "Those are mine. That's my hall. That's my future they're parading." One by one, the photos cut across the screen like knives. Sedona posing with Orion under the arch of Murphy's Hall. Sedona holding a bouquet styled exactly like the one I had designed with the florist. Sedona standing at the head table, chin lifted, as though she had already taken my place. Laughter and applause filled the room as relatives pointed and nodded. "She looks radiant," one aunt said. Another added, "This suits her better than Eva ever could." Each flash on the screen was another slash across my skin. Rage burned beneath the surface, but I sat still, nails digging into my palms. To them, the photos were proof of love. To me, they were knives dressed as memories. A picture is worth 1,000 lies, I thought, and this slideshow was full of them. As the images rolled on, I realized something worse. My slideshow, the one I had painstakingly prepared, the story of my life with Orion, was missing. Instead of our photos, our shared moments, Sedona's version of the story was playing. I rose and walked to the tech table at the back of the hall. The young man operating the laptop looked nervous when I leaned down. "Where is the slideshow I made?" I asked, my voice calm but edged like glass. He stammered, eyes darting toward the stage. "Your mother gave us this one instead. She said it was the right file." I stared at him, then back at the glowing images of Sedona twirling in silk. My chest constricted, not just from anger, but from the precision of the betrayal. It wasn't clumsy. It was orchestrated. Guests began whispering, a ripple moving through the crowd. "Didn't Eva plan this wedding?" one asked. Another replied, "Then why is Sedona up there? It doesn't add up." Humiliation burned deeper now. Not only was I erased, but I was being rewritten in real time. To erase a person, you don't need to kill them. You just need to delete their story. I clenched my jaw, forced myself to turn away before my face betrayed the storm inside. I remembered Eleanor Roosevelt's words. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Consent was something I would not give tonight. I returned to my seat, slipped my phone from my purse, and opened the camera quietly. While guests cheered at Sedona's lies projected larger than life, I recorded. Each image, each frame, I captured silently. What they thought was humiliation would become my weapon. They believed they had silenced me, but silence could be sharper than screams if you chose the right moment to end it. They wanted silence, I thought. I'll give them silence, but not surrender. I sat there, still as stone, while the slideshow marched on. I was no longer watching it as a victim. I was documenting evidence as a strategist. The final image filled the screen. Sedona holding Orion's hand, her smile wide, his forced, and applause thundered. Guests rose to their feet, clapping as though the performance deserved ovation. I stared at the screen, my own history deleted, replaced by lies. Applause swelled around me, but I didn't move. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my eyes fixed on the proof of betrayal dressed up as celebration. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's the pause before the proof. Sedona's voice still rang in my ears as I stepped out of Murphy's Hall, her scream trailing behind me like a sour note that refused to die. But the farther I walked from that building, the quieter everything became, until the only sound left was the click of my heels against the pavement. When I reached my apartment and closed the door behind me, the hush pressed against my chest heavier than any applause ever had. The city outside buzzed faintly, cars, sirens in the distance, the murmur of nightlife spilling into the streets, but inside my apartment, it was only me. That silence wasn't emptiness, it was weight, reminder, consequence. Applause fades, but silence lingers. I sat down on the couch without turning on the lights, the folder of documents still clutched under my arm, the shadows wrapped around me, and for the first time, I let the quiet settle. It wasn't loneliness, it was proof. This silence would be the soil where I began again. I stayed there, staring at the spread of papers on my coffee table, the lease, the bank statements, the receipts with my name bold and undeniable. They had tried to erase me, but these were the remnants of truth they couldn't burn. I whispered into the still air. They thought they buried me. They only planted me. For a long time I simply breathed, letting the words echo back at me. I acknowledged the cost of what had happened. Sedona might have lost a haul, but I had lost a fiancé. Orion's betrayal wasn't just a wound. It was final, like a nail driven into a coffin. My mother's choice to hand over those papers confirmed a truth I had always feared but never wanted to believe. Her loyalty was to Sedona, not me. The grief of that knowledge pressed against my ribs, sharp as glass, but beneath it was something stronger, relief. The chains were broken. The ties I had clung to, fragile and brittle, had snapped. I leaned back and whispered, almost to test the thought aloud. Sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. Oprah Winfrey's words floated to me from memory. Doing the best at this moment puts you in the best place for the next moment. I realized that was all I could do. Live this moment fully, take the pain and the clarity, and let them guide me forward. When I closed my eyes, I replayed the walk out of Murphy's Hall. It had felt like slow motion, every step deliberate, each movement a severing of ties. Guests had watched in silence as the doors closed behind me, their eyes wide with a mix of judgment and awe. That walk wasn't humiliation, it was liberation. Each step freed me from the chains of family manipulation, from applause that never belonged to me, from expectations that suffocated me since childhood. I thought of all I had lost, and then I reframed it. I thought I lost everything, I whispered. But what I really lost was their permission to live. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their approval. Betrayal was no longer the end. It was the doorway to independence. Pain and clarity intertwined in me, bittersweet but undeniable. The empowerment didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence, with the heavy air of my apartment, with the knowledge that I had walked away and the world hadn't ended. I stood and walked to my bookshelf, pulling down an old leather-bound journal I hadn't opened in years. Its blank pages waited for me, and tonight they would no longer wait in vain. I sat at my desk and began to write. Not for them, not even for Orion or Sedona, but for myself. Line after line, I poured out the truth of what had happened, anchoring myself in ink. For so long, my story had been edited, erased, rewritten by others. Tonight, it belonged only to me. As I wrote, the thought grew steadier. Family doesn't define me. My choices do. My handwriting wasn't perfect. My hand trembled at times, but each word stitched me back together in a way that applause never could. When I closed the journal, I felt something inside settle. Calm, not dramatic, not loud, just steady resilience. Later that night, I stepped onto my balcony, the city lights of San Antonio shimmering like scattered jewels across the horizon. I leaned against the railing, the cool air brushing my face. The silence here wasn't empty. It was both lonely and free, a reminder of what I had lost and what I had reclaimed. For the first time in years, I felt no weight pressing me into the ground. Instead, I felt lighter, though not untouched. The scars remained, but they had become part of my strength. As I gazed at the skyline, I knew the silence wasn't the end of my story. It was the pause before something else, something I hadn't expected. And as dawn began to break on the horizon, I realized my past wasn't gone. It was waiting, in the form of a letter from my father. The first light of dawn poured through my blinds, painting gold across my kitchen table. I sat there in the quiet, coffee cooling beside me, staring at the envelope I had found slipped under my door. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The handwriting was familiar, one I had not seen in years. My father's. He was gone, but somehow his words had found me now, after all that had been torn from me. My chest ached as I traced the ink of his name across the envelope. The dead can't speak, but their words can still save you. I thought of that as I slid a finger under the flap and pulled the letter free. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, like his old study. My throat tightened as I unfolded it, the sunlight spilling across lines written in his careful script. I braced myself, both vulnerable and expectant. This letter was my anchor, and I knew it might be the final piece I needed to step out of the shadow of this family for good. "Eva," it began, steady as though he were sitting across from me. "If you're reading this, it means the battles I feared for you have come to pass. I always knew the jealousy in this family ran deeper than most would admit, but I never doubted you had the strength to withstand it." Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. "What you build with honesty can't be stolen forever. Others may wear your work, claim your efforts, but truth endures. You will endure. Don't let them convince you that your worth is theirs to define." I pressed the page against my chest, my body shuddering. His voice, though silent for years, filled the room like a balm and a blade at once. It hurt to read, yet it stitched me together in ways I hadn't thought possible. He wrote of his love, of his belief in me. He warned me not to mistake blood for loyalty. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. The words rang true, cutting through the fog of betrayal I had been trapped in. The letter was both a wound and a bandage. It reopened the ache of his absence, but it also reminded me I did not need Mahola's approval, or Sedona's shadow, or Orion's hollow promises. My father's faith in me was enough to remind me who I was. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My anchor was here. But anchors don't just hold you in place. They steady you for the moment you decide to rise. A few days later, Mahola summoned the family for a meeting at her house. She called it an attempt to smooth things over, but I knew better. It was damage control. When I walked in, folder in hand, the air was thick with unease. Sedona sat near the fireplace, arms crossed, chin high. Orion lingered at her side, silent, guilt written across his face. My mother stood tall, her gaze sharp as ever. "You embarrassed this family," Mahola said as soon as I sat down. Her tone carried no regret, only accusation. I leaned forward, my voice steady. No. I revealed it. Gasps scattered across the room. Some cousins looked down at their laps, avoiding my eyes. Others waited, wide-eyed, sensing what was coming. I opened the folder, slid out my father's letter, and read it aloud. Each word carried weight, the sound of his belief in me silencing even the boldest whispers. Sedona laughed bitterly. Touching. A dead man's words don't change the fact that you've ruined everything. I met her gaze, then laid another document on the table. But this does. It was proof of my father's will, an inheritance left to me that Sedona had conveniently kept hidden. My attorney had uncovered it, and now the evidence lay plain for all to see. Sedona's smirk vanished. Mahola's face drained of color. The room fell into stunned silence. This isn't just dignity reclaimed, I said, my voice cold but calm. It's my legacy, and it always was. No one argued, no one dared. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and they all knew it. I remembered Michelle Obama's words, "When they go low, we go high." And while I refused to sink to their cruelty, I had landed the final strike that ensured they could never bury me again. I left that house not in tears, but in quiet authority. My steps were steady, the folder tucked under my arm, my father's letter folded carefully inside. Revenge wasn't the point, I told myself as I walked into the sunlight. Reclaiming myself was. I did not look back at the house, at the family who had chosen to erase me. My life would not be rebuilt in their shadows. The sunlight warmed my face as I crossed the street, my resolve unshaken. The flame inside me wasn't revenge, it was renewal. That night, I sat again at my kitchen table, the letter beside me. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the understudy in Sedona's play, or the scapegoat of Mahola's ambitions. I was a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her rightful place. "They took what I built," I whispered, closing my eyes. "But I built again, this time, without them."